Without further ado, I am pleased to welcome our keynote speaker, Minister Merav Michaeli. She is Israel's Minister of Transportation and Road Safety, a position she took up with the establishment of the current government in June 2021 and was elected leader of the Labor Party in January of 2021. A member of the Knesset since 2013, she served as an opposition MK on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, including its subcommittees and the House Committee. Her activities have extended over many issues and sectors, including social economic discourse, gender equality, the relationship between state and religion, LGBTQ rights, labor rights, and promoting the peace process. Prior to her election to the Knesset, she was a senior journalist at Haaretz, regularly publishing op-eds and interviews. She also edited and hosted news and entertainment programs on both television and radio. She was involved in the establishment of Galgalatz and Radio Tel Aviv radio stations and served as a lecturer in universities and colleges on media gender. In her political and parliamentary activities, she continues her professional and ideological path. For over 20 years, she has been involved in feminist activism, seeking to promote women's equality and opportunity. She also works to promote the rights of minorities, labor rights, and the peace process. In 1997, Merav founded Ezra Nashim, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide support for victims of sexual assault. She is a member of the executive committee of the Israel Peace Initiative, a member of the management board of the Israel's Women's Network, and headed the Knesset subcommittee for the fight against trafficking of women. She successfully spearheaded legislative initiatives providing support to individuals in substantial debt to Israel's National Debt Collection Agency and workers, and protecting the rights of members of the LGBTQ+ community. She has been ranked as one of the most prolific and most socially oriented legislators. In addition to her many titles, the minister recently added the term of mother. She and her partner Lior recently welcomed a son named Uri. On behalf of the entire Israel Vans family, we wish you a mazel tov. Ladies, welcome the minister, Merav Michaeli.
Congratulations, this caught me off guard, this congratulation, I have to admit, So thank you so very much. And yes, indeed, this is the new feature in my life, which is, is sort of coloring everything in a new, bright color. And thanks to being able to bring him from the US, I also had the pleasure of meeting my friend Israel Maimon in person recently, and I'm happy that he invited me to meet you all here tonight. It's a pleasure being here. Good evening, everyone. I hope to be able to meet all of you in person, not too far off from now. I think we are all missing the time when it was a non-issue to just meet people. I also want to open with thanking you all for your commitment and your support in Israel. This is so important and so meaningful for us to know that we have you. I hope you feel that you have us. And I know that our work is cut out for us in taking care of legislation in Israel in a way that really makes Israel what it's supposed to be according to the Zionist vision. And that is to be the state of all the Jewish people, regardless of how one interprets or experiences their Judaism. The law in Israel should recognize all Jews equally and enable each and every one of us to pray, to get married, and to fulfill their freedom of religion and faith fully. That, of course, in addition to the commitment that Israel must have to civil equality between all of its citizens. This has always been the Zionist vision, and I, as chair of labor, am completely committed to continuing working and fighting until Israel becomes what the Zionist vision wanted it to be. So, with your permission, I'll take a few minutes to introduce myself. I was born in Petach Tikva. I don't know how many of you have ever heard about Petach Tikva. It was the first moshava, not an agriculture town, but sort of. It's probably 140 years ago, something like that, or part of the history of the building of the state of Israel. I think only 4 years into my being a member of Knesset, I've been in the Knesset for 8 years now, maybe 8.5. Only 4 years into this political career that I never planned, did I realize that I come from a very political family. My grandfather, whom you may see behind me in the photograph, my late grandfather, on my father's side, the Michaeli side, he was the last secretary of Mapam, the Socialist Party in Israel. He came from Poland in around 33 as a little bit past his bar mitzvah. He ran away from home, from his Mizrahi home, to go to the Shomer HaTzair and made his family make aliyah, and by that, of course, rescuing them. And he was, him and my grandmother, one must say, who was a feminist without, of course, calling herself that. They always spoke in every Friday night, every Friday dinner. They always spoke about peace and about equality. For me, it wasn't politics. It was life. It was what one is striving to achieve, working for, what is right, what is worthy. So my grandfather was the last general secretary of Mapam before it became a part of Meretz. And my other grandfather, from my mother's side, was Dr. Israel Kastner. Kastner was a Zionist activist in Hungary, in Budapest, during the war. He got married to my grandmother by being the parliamentarian assistant of her father, who was a member of parliament in the Romanian parliament when Transylvania was in Romania. And he was, when he came finally to Israel, he was nominated to being a member of Knesset. He never made it because he was assassinated by right-wing underground in Israel after having been accused in collaborating with the Nazis, when in fact, after he was assassinated, he was completely exonerated by the Supreme Court. And the historic research proves above all doubt, and he's always also commemorated in Yad Vashem today for rescuing at least 20,000 Jews, but the research shows that it was much, much more, many, many more actually. And he did that by negotiating with Eichmann and other Nazi officers in a fascinating, complicated, unbelievable story that was actually captured in a documentary, an American documentary called Killing Kastner, if you're intrigued in any way. But anyways, so this is my legacy on both sides of peace, of equality, of non-conformism, of refusing to see yourself as a victim, even when the circumstance have really paved or actually created the perfect role of victim. When you are a Jew, standing in front of Adolf Eichmann, he refused to see himself as a victim, and so did my other grandfather. So I think that with that, I started my fights in the school, refusing all kinds of things that the school wanted me to do. In the 70s in Israel, when they split the classroom for boys to study carpentry and girls to study sewing, and I was like, why should I be studying sewing if I'm only because I'm a female? And then the next year, I already refused to go to homemaking classes while the boys went to study electronics. So I think this was the beginning of my activism. It continued with what I consider a career in the Scouts, which also took me to my first acquaintance with the U.S. American Jewry. I was a counselor in the Scouts delegation. I was a counselor at a JCC day camp in West Palm Beach, Florida. Yay. One must admit that there's no better acquaintance with the community that way. It was actually very fulfilling, and it was a very, very good experience. So as you've heard, my IDF service was that I was accepted to the IDF radio station on the media. I did a lot of fun stuff and meaningful stuff on radio, on television. I was a celebrity from a very early age, and I used my platforms to, in a minor way, to express my feminist views. I didn't think at the time that it was okay to actually act on it professionally. I mean, I did, but in a subversive way, I would say. I have to sort of star the understanding that during the 60s and the 70s, when America went through the feminist revolutions, Israel was busy fighting other wars. And so we grew up, men and women, girls and boys, in a very militaristic society that was very clear about the priorities, who's more important and who's less important, who's doing the primary work and who's supplying services to them in the army and outside of the army. And I think the 90s was probably the first decade in which we did not have a major war. And so in 95, when I was really in the peak of my primetime success, I was approached by directors from the Rape Crisis Center, something that was so marginal and so non-legit and so taboo that very few people knew that it even existed. And they asked me, would I be willing to host their annual fundraise? And I said, I'll do anything you want me to, but why are you perpetuating the taboo on rape and sexual assault by holding a lame, pathetic event in a filthy, marginal place, in a, I don't want to use, improper language, but in a really a place where you can't bring important and rich people. You have to take it to a major sort of mainstream platform where you can bring the important and the rich people, and you can actually derive change and turn sexual assault into something that is legit to speak about and change legislation and bring resources and work on everything that we know that we have to work on. Now, mid-90s in Israel, nobody dared speaking about sexual assault. The word feminism did not exist in the public sphere. We did not have a law against sexual harassment. We did not even have the phrase sexual harassment in the language. And they said, no one is willing to be identified with rape. Even those who will help us will only do it incognito. I said, what, are you serious? Like, we know the size, the extent of this horrible phenomenon, and you're telling me no one's willing to be identified with the fight against it. And so I made a list of every prominent woman I could think of that I thought may be willing to come on board. And we launched a huge campaign. And ever since then, I had a career in what my beloved non-husband calls professional feminism. Soon enough, I was approached by every other feminist organization, and then organizations of different kinds of parts of Israeli society and the Arab community and workers' rights, and of course, peace organizations. And ever since I started my activism in parallel to my career on the media, using my platform in every way I possibly could to promote the things that I believed in, I was asked, when will I go to politics and why don't I go to politics? And it was never, ever obvious to me that I will go to politics, because who wants to be this thing, a politician? It's this, even this word is like, but somehow I found myself running in the primaries in Labor in 2012, and the rest is history. I came to Labor because I know that in order to go back on the Zionist track, Israel needs a political tool that can take her there. A party that can be a governing party for the center-left camp in Israel. Labor was that. Labor needs to be that. But with the process that took place in Israel since 93, actually, and the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin and everything that came before and after, Labor was almost completely devastated and almost gone. Before the last elections, it was 0.7 in the polls. And I was alone in the opposition to a government in which the two other mandates in Labor were on it. And I kept saying that Labor is the future and that we need to fight about Labor and that we can revive Labor and turn it into what it needs to be. Thankfully, despite the fact that nobody believed it could be done, we did it. And I have to tell you that one of the most exciting, moving moments that I had during this journey was that the day after I was elected in the primaries for chair of Labor, I decided that a week from then, we will hold primaries for the list of the party, and that the list will be completely egalitarian in the zipper method. A woman, man, woman, man, woman, man, woman, man. Now, I tried to do this in Labor ever since I came in, and every chair that I had said to me, yes, it's a good idea, but it's impossible, it's difficult, we can't do this. And wow, it's possible. And not only is it possible, but you could see that since I have declared that, people voted accordingly. They voted almost completely equally to men and women. And we have an amazing, amazing faction in the Knesset. We are 7 in the Knesset. It's the first ever faction since we are 7, and I am number 1, and number 7 is a woman. It's the first ever faction that has more women than men, 4 women and 3 men. And it is very, very, very exciting. So Labor, in this renewed version, has the opportunity of being a prominent part in this change government that we have been able to form. A government that brings back to Israel stability that was so missed for such a long time. a government that is based on the first ever coalition in Israel that has an Arab party in it, an inseparable part of this coalition, a coalition that brings back legitimization to big parts of Israeli society that were delegitimized for a very long time, a government that is bringing a budget, something that Israel did not have for 3 years. It's hard to believe, but we were without a budget for 3 years. And it is a budget that brings so many things it brings for the first time ever. Part of it is our budgets to fight violence against women, sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, things that we have been fighting for so long. Now, the number of members of Knesset is not the highest that we've had. It's 36 out of 120. We have had 36 in recent years, on and off. But we have 9 out of 24, or 26 actually, 27 ministers in the government. We have a third in the government. That is unprecedented. And the difference is huge. It's just huge. Immediately when the government was formed, the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Energy and myself, we are 3 women, started cooperating. And just last week we passed historic resolutions about clean energy, about clean transportation, about fighting the environment crisis, the climate crisis in Israel, with unprecedented cooperation between us, and in addition with the Minister for Economy, who's also a woman. And the way we can communicate between us and the way our presence around the table in the government changes the atmosphere, changes the discourse, is just this kind of satisfaction that you can see that what you've been saying for so many years, how representation is not just a token issue, but it's a matter of essence. It's a matter of life itself, if you will. It's a matter of the issues. It's a matter of being able to change our reality. Really proves itself so dramatically. So that's where we are today, and I'm happy to share that with you. That doesn't mean we still don't have many challenges, but now I want you to ask me about the challenges and about anything else.
And now I turn the program for Jessica Milestein, that is our National Director of Women's Division, to run the Q&A session.
Good afternoon. Minister Michaeli, thank you again for being here. As Israel mentioned, my name is Jessica Milstein, and I am the National Director of the Women's Division at Israel Bonds. I'd like to ask a few more questions before we open it up to the audience members. So as you mentioned, there are 9 ministers. What do you attribute to this to? What was done differently by women in this election cycle?
Well, first of all, the progressive political camp has a large representation in this government. And as we know, progressives have more women in their parties and more women in higher positions in their parties. As I mentioned, the fact that Labor had an egalitarian list and brought so many women in made also before the closing of the lists, made also other parties that are non-democratic parties and are completely up to their chairs to decide on who's on the list, made them push some women up because all of a sudden it became attractive. And so we found ourselves with more ministers in the cabinet. this is how it happens. And hopefully this is a standard that we will not be able to go down from, but only up.
Yes, absolutely. Let's hope so. And how do you think this group of women will impact Israel's policy?
So first of all, it's not only this group of women, but as part of my coalition agreement, I am chairing a cabinet for gender equality, in which not only women ministers, but also male ministers are a part of. And there is a commitment for the first time ever in the baselines of this government to work towards gender equality in every sphere of life. So, as I mentioned, in this budget, there are already some steps towards this, but certainly in our cabinet for gender equality, we mean to use this next, let's say, half a year or 8 months or so, in order to phrase policy, to legislate, to focus on policies that will bring gender equality, not only in the sense that of promoting women, but in promoting the changes in structure so that there is more freedom of gender, I would call it, to everyone. For instance, one of the things that I strongly believe in is an egalitarian parenthood leave. The fact that only women in Israel, we have maternity leave. I know in America it's still a challenge that you are facing, but here we have a maternity leave. I strongly believe that men also, first of all, have the right to get this opportunity to spend time with their newborns and to experience the physical care of their babies and infants. This is one of the basic foundations of what defines masculinity, femininity, what enables men and women to have different opportunities in the work world, etc. So this is one thing that we'll be working on. Better education for little children. Again, not only better, but also more reliable, and also such that enables men and women to spend more time in the work world. More time meaning not too much time, of course. This life-work balance, etc. I think also I would say there's more creativity when you have, and you know that, all of us know that women, when women are at the table, they bring their way of thinking, they bring their life experiences, and the discourse is richer. I think that is one of the key differences. There are more points of view. There are more options that come up to every problem. And again, as I said, at least in this government, I mean, it's not only women, it's feminist women, and it's progressive women. And so this is where we'll be taking this government and this country, this government.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We've also received a number of questions from our audience members, and we look forward to hearing your responses. And to all those participating today, if you'd like to ask Minister Michaeli a question, please use the raise hand function on your Zoom screen. So our first question comes from Clara from Pikesville, Maryland.
Hi, Clara.
Hello, Minister Michaeli. My question to you is, what are your top priorities as Minister of Transportation and Road Safety?
Oh. Okay, let's talk about that. Because I think transportation is a huge challenge everywhere today. I think in Israel, we are in an especially dire situation. It's really a crisis. It's really an emergency situation. And we are even looking into making it formal, an emergency situation. So just the big stones are to turn most of the effort and to turn like a big part of the budgets into public transportation rather than private cars. Public transportation in Israel is behind in every way, in the infrastructure, in service, in the variety of means that we have for public transportation, in its reliability, the lot. So this is a major thing we're concentrating on. We're putting a lot of effort into allowing people to walk safely and to have the connectivity, to be able to walk to public transportation, to be able to ride bikes, which in Israel is, it's the most logical thing to do. We have to protect people from the new options that are great in some ways, but are dangerous in others, and that is the electrical bikes and scooters. All of those, we have to somehow regulate that. And there's a very big investment that's going to be made in the Arab community in Israel. Many years of neglect have brought to unbearable gaps. So this government as a whole has passed an amazing program of 32 billion shekels that are going to be invested in the Arab community in the next 5 years. Transport has a big part of that, and we're going to focus on that as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Sounds like a real need that you're addressing. Our next question comes from Samuel John Beggs. Oh, can you unmute yourself? Samuel, you're muted.
Right, try again. The previous government funded abortions in Israel rather than fund newborn babies that are coming into the world. Will this government do a change in this policy to fund newborn children rather than fund doctors to perform abortions?
I'm not sure I understood completely, but abortion is less of an issue in Israel than it is in the US, thankfully. It's not that we don't have any restrictions on abortion, but it is more fair and more enabling than it is in the US. And it's especially not a polarizing issue the way it is in America. What I think our version of the abortion issue in Israel is the marriage and divorce issue, because Israel is the last democracy that still does not have civil marriage. The Israeli law only recognizes religious marriage, be it Jewish or Muslim or Christian or whatever. And this is, of course, this is very hard for women, both in the marriage and mostly in the divorce. So the fight for civil marriage is something that we concentrate on. And since this government was able to make a very important reform in the whole kosher world in Israel, and for the first time to take away the monopoly of the rabbinate in everything that has to do with the kosher licenses, I am certain that the next thing should and can be the religious marriage versus civil marriage, and to allow different kind of marriages and divorces in Israel.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Julia from Los Angeles, California. Minister Michaeli, how do you assess relations between Jewish women in the diaspora in Israel? What are you hopeful about, and what concerns do you have, if any?
Oh. Well, first of all, I have concerns, unfortunately, and not only about women and Jewish women in the diaspora, but Jewish women and men in the diaspora. And I think, as I said in my opening, that unfortunately Israel helped alienating very big parts of the Jewish community, especially in the US, by refusing to recognize and acknowledge huge parts of this community, reforms, conservatives, and others that did not obey to the Orthodox standards that have a strong hold in politics and in the religious politics in Israel. And so things that are even civil, such as women of the wall, or as I said, the fact that marriage and conversion and other issues that mean a lot, not only in terms of value to big parts of American Jewry, but also for their civil rights in Israel, are not given to them. So this is for us, and that is a major thing for labor as well. One of the things I insisted on during the coalition negotiation was taking the diaspora ministry to labor. And my friend Nachman Shai is now the minister. I believe some of you or most of you have met Nachman Shai along the way. He is as a celebrated journalist and politician, and was the IDF spokesperson, and was the representative of the foundations in Israel. And Nachman knows the diaspora in general and the US Jewry community and communities very, very well. And we are changing the way Israel is reaching out to you and making a big effort to bring people back to listening to Israel, to being willing to even, I would say, really listen to the complexity and, give us the benefit of the doubt that even if you don't agree with everything, and God knows I don't agree with everything that my country has been doing for many years, still, it is all of us as home. This is our goal.
Thank you. It's really been an honor to spend time with you, and you've shared so much really remarkable insight. And God willing, soon we'll all be there in person together to discuss these complexities and to really rebuild our bond after so many months apart with Jews in the diaspora and in Israel. Thank you again, Minister Michaeli. I now turn the program over to Terry Auerbach, National Women's Division Executive Council Member.
Thank you so very much. It's been an honor and a pleasure being here with you, and hopefully soon in face to face.